The gold band of my late husband's wedding ring was heavy on my thumb, a permanent fixture I wore to keep the weight of his memory close to my skin. The morning air in my rose garden was crisp, smelling of damp earth and coming rain. The kind of weather Thomas used to say was perfect for deep roots. I was pruning the climbing red beauties, the shears cold and familiar in my grip, when my son's shadow fell over the bushes, blocking out the pale morning light. Mark didn't announce himself with a greeting. He announced himself with a demand, and the suddenness of it broke the quiet rhythm of my sanctuary. "Mom, let me see your hand," he said, and his voice lacked the familiar warmth it used to carry when he was a boy asking for help. Before I could even turn fully, before I could ask him why he was out in the garden before his coffee, his fingers closed around my wrist. It wasn't a gentle touch. It was an assessment. He slid his thumb down to mine and began to work Thomas's ring over my knuckle. The gold dug into my bone, so sharply it stole my breath. And for a second, I couldn't tell if the sting came from the metal or from the cold, clinical look in my son's eyes as he pried the only piece of my husband I had left right off my body. "Mark, what on earth are you doing?" I asked, pulling my hand back. But he held firm, his grip tightening just enough to let me know he was in charge of the movement. "Chloe needs it," he said, not looking at my face, only at the prize now resting in his palm. "We're going to get it sized for her. You've been losing weight, Mom. It's practically slipping off. Chloe says you're getting too frail to keep track of something so valuable. And it would be a shame to lose Dad's ring in the dirt out here." I stared at him, my mind trying to catch up to the sheer audacity of the words coming out of his mouth. Frail. Losing track. It was the vocabulary of a slow erasure. Words chosen deliberately to paint me as a fading ghost in my own life. I reached out to take it back. "Give me the ring, Mark. That belongs to me. Chloe has her own jewelry." But Mark didn't hand it back. Instead, he stepped into my space, his broad shoulders suddenly acting as a wall between me and the path back to my own kitchen. He didn't hit me. He didn't raise his hands. But he used his size the way men do, when they want to remind a woman that the physical world belongs to them. He blocked my path, looking down at me with an expression that wasn't anger, but a profound, exhausting annoyance. "Stop being so difficult," he sighed, the word dragging out like a punishment. "You're getting senile about these things. It's just a ring. It stays in the family. Chloe is family now. Just let it go before you make a scene." He turned on his heel and walked back toward the house, leaving me standing in the damp soil. I didn't scream. I didn't chase him. I stood perfectly still, my bare thumb throbbing with an empty ache, and watched the back of my son's head as he carried my history away. That was the moment I realized the soil in my garden wasn't the only thing that had changed seasons. My home had shifted from a place of refuge to a territory under siege. If you are watching me right now, I want you to tell me what time it is, where you are. Because I remember the exact second I understood that my son didn't see me as a mother anymore. He saw me as an obstacle in the way of his inheritance. People in town always admired Mark. They called him Thomas's spitting image. A handsome, driven young man who carried his father's confident stride. But Thomas's confidence came from building things. Mark's confidence, I was beginning to see, came from expecting things to be handed to him. After Thomas passed, the house felt too large, too echoing with the silence of a life interrupted. When Mark married Chloe 2 years ago, I did what loving, practical mothers do. I offered them the East Wing. I told myself that the sounds of young life would warm the cold corners of the house. I framed it as a way for them to save for their own future, to build their foundation without the crushing weight of a mortgage. Chloe had smiled, her eyes sweeping over the crown molding, the hardwood floors, and the sweeping staircase. I mistook her wide eyes for gratitude. What it really was, I see clearly now, was an appraisal. The first few months were a masterclass in polite boundaries. Chloe called me Mrs. Vance, stepping lightly around my kitchen, asking permission to use the good china. But slowly, the politeness thinned out like cheap fabric. A vase Thomas bought me in Italy was moved to the attic because it clashed with their aesthetic. My designated parking spot in the garage was taken over by Chloe's sports car because she didn't want the morning dew on her windshield. If I mentioned it, Mark would hit me with that same practiced, exhausting sigh. Mom, don't be so rigid. We live here too. You have to learn to share the space. Sharing, in their dictionary, meant my surrender. But the ring wasn't just a boundary crossed, it was a declaration of war. And the generals of that war were not just Mark and Chloe. The true strategist was Chloe's mother, Valerie. Valerie was a real estate agent with loud perfume, louder opinions, and a smile that never quite reached her calculating eyes. She treated my home like a listing she hadn't quite secured yet. The afternoon following the incident in the garden, I came inside from the heat to find Valerie and Chloe standing in my beloved sunroom, the room where Thomas used to read his Sunday papers. Valerie was holding a silver tape measure, stretching it across the vintage floral rug, while Chloe tapped notes into her phone. Neither of them heard me approach. "It's perfect for a nursery," Valerie was saying, her voice echoing off the glass panes. "We tear out these outdated built-in bookshelves, put the crib against the far wall. The natural light is fabulous. You'll have the whole downstairs flowing beautifully once we open up that kitchen wall." "Mark thinks she'll fight us on the bookshelves," Chloe murmured, her tone devoid of any affection. "She's so attached to this old junk." Valerie snapped the tape measure shut with a sharp, metallic click. "She won't have the energy to fight much longer, sweetheart. Have you looked at those brochures I gave you? The assisted living facility out in Westlake. It has the smallest footprint, very economical. And it's far enough away that she won't be dropping by unannounced to check on the property. Mark just needs to get power of attorney. Once we establish that she's getting confused. Which, let's be honest, leaving her jewelry lying around the garden is a clear sign of decline. It's a simple legal step. Then, the deed transfers smoothly." I stood in the hallway, the shadows hiding my form, and stopped breathing. I didn't drop my glass of water. I didn't gasp. I listened as two women measured my home for a life that did not include me, using my own son as the legal bulldozer to clear me out. The audacity of it didn't make me want to cry. It made my vision go incredibly sharp. They were talking about me as if I were already a ghost. A minor legal hurdle to be managed, with a signature and a nursing home brochure. They took my husband's ring to fabricate a story of my decline. The theft wasn't just about greed, it was evidence for their narrative. I turned around and walked silently back down the hall to my study. The room Thomas had insulated with thick oak doors for his estate planning. I closed the door behind me, and the heavy click of the latch felt like the sound of a vault ceiling. I didn't sit down to weep. I didn't call my friends to complain about my ungrateful daughter-in-law. I sat at my husband's heavy mahogany desk, folded my hands, and let the truth arrange itself. In my mind, the way a jury arranges the facts of a crime. My son was not misguided. He was complicit. He had traded his mother's peace for his wife's comfort. And he was prepared to institutionalize me to secure the real estate. By the time the sun set, the house had grown quiet in that staged, tense way it always did when they were waiting for me to go to sleep so they could roam freely. I opened the bottom drawer of the desk. The drawer Thomas had told me to open only if the world ever turned upside down. I pulled out his leather-bound estate binder. I didn't look at the deed. I already knew it was in my name. I looked at the specific clauses he had drafted. With the paranoia of a man who knew what money did to bloodlines. And then I opened a small, locked wooden box, sitting on the bookshelf. Inside was a heavy, rusted iron key. It belonged to the garden suite. A polite family joke for the dilapidated, weather-beaten storage shed, sitting on the absolute farthest edge of our 2-acre property, right next to the property line. It had no plumbing, a leaky roof, and smelled of old fertilizer and decay. I took the rusted key, polished it just enough to make the iron shine, with a dull menace, and placed it inside a small, black velvet jeweler's box I had saved from an old anniversary present. I closed the lid. It snapped shut with a definitive sound. The next morning, I moved through my kitchen with the practiced calm of a woman who had already won a game the other players didn't know had started. I brewed coffee. I toasted bread. When Mark came downstairs, dressed in his tailored suit for work, he looked at me with a lingering caution, waiting to see if I was going to throw a tantrum about the ring. Chloe trailed behind him, wearing her silk robe, her eyes darting to my bare left hand with a smug, concealed victory. I didn't scowl. I smiled. It was a soft, grandmotherly smile, the exact kind they expected from a woman who was finally conceding defeat. I walked over to the kitchen island and placed the black velvet box directly in front of Mark's coffee mug. Mark stopped mid-sip. He looked at the box, then up at me, his brow furrowing in confusion. Chloe stepped closer, her eyes widening. The velvet box looked important. It looked heavy. It looked like wealth. "What's this?" Mark asked, his voice losing its arrogant edge, replaced by a sudden, hungry curiosity. "I was doing a lot of thinking last night, Mark," I said, my voice low and steady, dripping with a rehearsed sweetness. "About the space in this house. About the ring. About the future. I realize that you and Chloe are trying to build a life. And I've been stubborn, holding on to things. This property is large, and you clearly love it enough to want to take over." Chloe's face lit up. She actually placed a hand on Mark's shoulder, squeezing it in triumph. She looked at the box like it contained the crown jewels. "Mrs. Vance, that is so understanding of you," she cooed, the fake affection returning instantly. "Mom, you didn't have to," Mark started, but his hand was already reaching for the box. He thought it was the rest of the safe's contents, or perhaps the combination, or the key to the main safe deposit box at the bank. He smiled, a wide, greedy expression. That broke my heart one final time, before my resolve sealed it shut forever. Finally, he breathed out, "You've come to your senses." He grabbed the box and popped the lid open. The smile on his face didn't fade, it shattered. He froze, his eyes staring down at the rusted, jagged piece of iron resting on the pristine white satin. Chloe leaned in, her smile collapsing into a confused grimace. "What is that?" she demanded, the sweetness vanishing from her voice like smoke. "Is that a joke?" "No joke," I said, picking up my coffee cup and taking a slow, measured sip. "That is the key to the garden suite. The shed by the back fence. Since you two are so desperate for a property in your name, and you seem to think I am incapable of managing my own affairs, I am giving you your own space. Consider it your new home office, or your new living quarters. Because as of this morning, your permission to reside in the main house has been entirely revoked." Mark's head snapped up, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "What the hell are you talking about? You can't be serious." "A shed, Mom, have you completely lost your mind?" He looked at Chloe, then back at me, his voice rising in panic and fury. "This proves it. You're completely senile." "I am lucid enough to serve you formal eviction papers," I replied, pointing to the thick manila envelope sitting on the far end of the counter, that he had missed in his greed for the velvet box. "You have 30 days to clear your belongings out of the East Wing. If you choose to stay on my property, you will be sleeping with the lawnmowers. You wanted to take my ring to prove I was frail. Let's see how frail I am when I lock the doors to my home. Mark stood up, his chair scraping violently against the tile. His fists clenched. You can't do this. Half of this house is mine. Dad wanted me to have it. Your father wanted a man to have it, I said, my voice dropping an octave, ringing with the absolute authority of a woman who owned the ground they stood on. Not a boy who steals his mother's wedding band to appease a greedy wife. Chloe pointed a shaking finger at me. We'll get a lawyer. My mother has the best real estate attorneys in the state. We'll prove you're incompetent, and we'll take the whole estate. Get your lawyer, Chloe, I whispered, holding her gaze until she was the one who had to look away. But pack your bags first. The 30 days that followed the presentation of the velvet box turned my home into a cold, silent war zone. Mark and Chloe didn't pack. They entrenched. They walked through the hallways with aggressive, heavy footsteps, speaking to each other in loud, pointed whispers whenever I was near. Valerie became a permanent fixture, marching through my front door without knocking, carrying stacks of legal pads and eyeing my furniture like she was at a foreclosure auction. They operated under the delusion that if they ignored the eviction notice, my resolve would eventually crumble under the weight of family pressure. They believed I was playing a game of chicken. They didn't understand I had already driven off the bridge. 2 weeks before their deadline, the retaliation arrived, delivered by a man in a cheap suit who handed me an envelope at my front door. It wasn't an eviction response. It was a lawsuit. Mark and Chloe had formally filed for a partition of property and an injunction to freeze the estate. In the dense legal jargon, the narrative was painted clearly. Guided by Valerie's venomous hand, they claimed that Thomas's will had implied a joint family ownership, that I was suffering from severe cognitive decline, that the incident with the rusty key was proof of my mental instability, and that I was an immediate danger to the estate's value. They were asking the court to grant Mark conservatorship over my affairs and immediate possession of the main house. They really thought they had me cornered. They thought my quietness was a lack of ammunition. The morning I went to see my late husband's estate attorney, Mr. Sterling, the sky was pouring rain. I walked into his polished downtown office, holding the lawsuit in one hand and my leather binder in the other. Sterling was a man who looked like he had been born in a three-piece suit. His silver hair immaculate, his eyes sharp. He read through their petition in silence, his expression never shifting. "They're claiming mental incompetence," Sterling finally said, setting the papers down. "And they are using your gift of the shed key as evidence of irrational behavior. They will likely try to subpoena medical records and bring in an expert to say your grief has mutated into dementia." "Let them," I said calmly. "I don't care what they claim about my mind. I care about what we can prove about their character." "What about the trap, Arthur?" Sterling allowed a small, rare smile to touch the corners of his mouth. "The trap is fully armed, Giselle. But we have to let them walk all the way into the courtroom before we spring it. If they realize what they've triggered beforehand, they'll withdraw the petition." When the court date arrived, the tension in the hallway outside the courtroom was thick enough to choke on. Mark paced the floor in his promotion suit, looking less like a confident heir and more like a man, trying to convince himself he wasn't doing something unforgivable. Chloe stood close to him, her arm looped through his, wearing a conservative dress meant to make her look like a dutiful daughter-in-law. Valerie hovered over them, whispering last-minute instructions, her eyes shooting daggers at me from across the polished floor. I sat alone on a wooden bench, my hands neatly folded over my purse, staring straight ahead. I didn't look at my son. The boy I raised died the moment he pried that ring off my finger. The man pacing the hallway was just a plaintiff. When we were called into the courtroom, the air felt heavy and clinical. The judge, a stern-faced woman with no patience for theatrics, took her seat and immediately began reviewing the files. Mark's attorney, a slick, fast-talking man hired by Valerie, stood up first. He launched into a well-rehearsed monologue about the tragedy of aging. He painted a picture of a devoted son trying to protect his mother from herself. He talked about my paranoia, citing my demand that they move into a dilapidated garden shed as a clear sign of a break from reality. "Your Honor," Mark's attorney pleaded smoothly. "Mr. Vance is simply trying to preserve his father's legacy. His mother is not well. She is giving away heirloom jewelry in the dirt, hallucinating threats, and locking her own family out of a home they have lovingly maintained. We request the partition of the property to protect the asset, and an immediate evaluation for conservatorship." Mark sat at his table, his head bowed, playing the part of the heartbroken son perfectly. Chloe dabbed at a dry eye with a tissue. The judge looked over her glasses at my table. "Mr. Sterling, does your client have a response?" To these allegations of cognitive decline, Sterling stood up slowly, buttoning his jacket. He didn't look flustered. He looked bored. "Your Honor, we do not have a response to the medical allegations, because the medical allegations are entirely irrelevant to the legal standing of this estate. Furthermore, the petitioners claim that they have lovingly maintained the home is not only legally void, it is demonstrably false." Sterling walked to his briefcase and pulled out a small, black USB drive. "We would like to submit Exhibit A into evidence. A video recording from the security camera located inside the aforementioned garden suite. The shed my client allegedly forced them into out of madness." Mark's head snapped up. Chloe dropped her tissue. Even Valerie, sitting in the gallery, stiffened. "A security camera in a shed?" the judge asked, an eyebrow raised. "Yes, Your Honor. My client's late husband kept valuable antique tools in that shed. It has been wired with audio and video for 6 years. When my client gave her son the key, he and his wife went to inspect the shed later that afternoon." The judge permitted the video to be played on the monitor. The courtroom fell dead silent as the grainy but perfectly clear footage filled the screen. It showed the interior of the dusty, cobweb-filled shed. The door opened and Mark and Chloe walked in. On the video, Mark kicked a rusty bucket across the floor, his voice echoing loudly. "This crazy old bat actually wants us to live in a shack. She's completely lost it." Chloe stepped into the frame, wiping dust off her designer coat. "It's perfect, Mark. Let her play her little games. My mom already talked to Dr. Evans. If we complain that she's getting combative and violent, he'll prescribe those heavy sedatives. We grind a little into her tea. She sleeps through the day. She stops fighting the paperwork. By the time the conservatorship goes through, she won't even know what day it is." Mark didn't argue. He didn't defend me. On the video, my son just nodded. "Whatever it takes to get her out of the main house. I'm not waiting 10 years for her to die to get what's mine." The video stopped. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was the kind of quiet that follows a car crash. I looked at Mark. All the color had drained from his face. He looked like he was going to be sick. Chloe was gripping the edge of her table so hard her knuckles were white. The slick attorney representing them looked like he wanted to crawl under his chair. They hadn't just been caught in a lie, they had been caught plotting elder abuse. The judge stared at the blank screen for a long, heavy moment, before turning her terrifying gaze toward Mark's table. "Mr. Vance," the judge said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "is there any context you'd like to provide? For conspiring to drug your mother for real estate." Mark opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was completely paralyzed by the reality of his own exposed cruelty. Sterling didn't let them breathe. He stepped forward again. "Your Honor, while the video speaks to the petitioner's character, the matter of the estate is settled by a much older document." Sterling lifted a heavy, sealed folder and handed it to the clerk. "I submit to the court the final amendment to Thomas Vance's estate, executed 5 years before his death. an amendment we affectionately call the Bloodline Clause. The judge opened the folder and read. Her eyebrows crept higher up her forehead. As you can see, Your Honor, Sterling continued, his voice ringing through the quiet room. Thomas Vance was a man of great foresight. He stipulated that the primary residence would pass entirely to his wife, Giselle Vance. He further stipulated that in the event of his death, any heir seeking to claim, partition, or force the sale of the property, while Giselle Vance still drew breath, would be subject to a strict condition. To inherit any portion of the estate, the heir must present a sworn, notarized character reference, signed by the town's oldest living resident currently residing on the property. Sterling paused, turning to look directly at Mark. That resident, Your Honor, is my client. The petitioner cannot inherit without his mother's sworn statement that he is of sound moral character and deserving of the legacy. Mark's attorney scrambled to his feet. Your Honor, that is an archaic, unenforceable clause. It's a technicality. It is a legally binding condition of the trust, Counselor, the judge snapped, slamming the folder down. And considering your clients just watched themselves on video, plotting to sedate a senior citizen to steal her house, I highly doubt they will be receiving that character reference today. But there's more, Your Honor, Sterling said, bringing down the final hammer. By filing this frivolous petition to partition the property, and by challenging my client's mental fitness to execute the will, the petitioner has formally triggered the no contest clause embedded in Section 4 of the trust. The words no contest clause landed like a physical blow. Mark literally slumped in his chair. He knew what that meant. Even Chloe, who had been relying on her mother's arrogant legal advice, understood the severity of those words. The clause dictates, Sterling said, reading from his notes, that any beneficiary who contests the will or challenges the primary beneficiary's rights without proven cause immediately forfeits their entire share of the estate, all assets, all property, all liquid funds. They are disinherited, completely and permanently. The judge looked at the paperwork, nodded slowly, and folded her hands. She didn't look at Mark with pity. She looked at him with disgust. The court finds no merit in the petition for partition. The court finds the allegations of mental incompetence to be malicious, fabricated, and, frankly, criminal in intent. I am dismissing this petition with prejudice. Furthermore, I am recognizing the activation of the no contest clause. Mr. Vance, you have legally forfeited your inheritance. Mark stood up, his legs shaking. Mom, he gasped, his voice cracking. Mom, please. You can't let them do this. I'm your son. I'm sorry. I didn't mean any of that in the shed. I was just. Chloe was pressuring me. Chloe whipped her head around, her face twisting in fury. Excuse me, you're throwing me under the bus. You're the one who stole the ring. They were already turning on each other. Two starving wolves locked in a cage they built themselves. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I felt the deep, profound exhaustion of a woman who had to cut off a diseased limb to save her own life. I stood up, smoothing the front of my skirt, and looked at my son for the very last time. You didn't forfeit your inheritance today, Mark, I said softly, my voice carrying across the silent courtroom. You forfeited it the day you put your hands on me in my garden. You wanted the house so badly, you forgot that a house is just wood and stone. It's the people inside it that make it worth something. And you are worth nothing to me anymore. The judge banged her gavel. Case dismissed. The petitioners have 48 hours to vacate the premises, or the sheriff will remove them. 2 days later, the sheriff's cruisers sat in my driveway, their lights flashing rhythmically against the brick facade of my home. I sat on my front porch in my rocking chair, a cup of hot tea in my hands, watching as Mark and Chloe dragged garbage bags full of clothes out to Valerie's cramped sedan. They couldn't afford a moving truck. Without my quiet financial padding, Without the promise of the estate, they were broke. Chloe was weeping, her mascara running down her face, screaming at her mother on the phone. Mark moved like a ghost, his shoulders hunched, his head down. He stopped once, looking up at the porch, his eyes meeting mine. He looked like a beggar hoping for a scrap of mercy. I took a sip of my tea and looked away. They moved into a cramped, two-bedroom apartment across town, right next to a noisy highway. I heard through the town gossip that Valerie stopped visiting them because there was no real estate left to squeeze. The marriage, built on the promise of my money, began to crumble under the reality of their own poverty. As for me, I took the space back. I hired a contractor and tore out the walls in the east wing. I didn't build a nursery. I built a massive, sunlit library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. I planted new roses in the garden. And the heavy gold band of my husband's ring, I had it melted down and recast into a beautiful, simple pendant that I wear around my neck, resting right over my heart. Safe, secure, and untouchable. I didn't destroy my son. I simply handed him the keys to the future he had built for himself. And I let him walk through the door.